The vote was 3 minutes from closing. "The final tranche, Mr. Thorne," hissed a voice through the obsidian speaker embedded in the Rolls-Royce's ceiling, "is contingent on the redundancy projections for the Argentis acquisition. We need your final proxy." Julian Thorne, immaculate in a charcoal bespoke suit, did not look up from the file balanced on his knee. His world was a cocoon of hand-stitched leather, whispering air conditioning, and the silent, relentless thrum of billions changing hands. "My vote is unchanged, Marcus. The redundancies are not only necessary, they are optimal. Proceed." He was already calculating the yield from the dissolution of the pension fund, a clinical, satisfying equation. The car, a land-based yacht, slid silently through the rain-slicked afternoon gridlock of the financial district. His driver, a man whose name Julian had never bothered to learn, was a perfect automaton. Until he wasn't, there was a sudden, violent sound. Not a crash, but a heavy, fleshy thump against the hood, followed by the hydraulic scream of the brakes. Julian was thrown forward, his file sliding onto the plush floor mat. "What in God's name?" he snarled, his voice a blade of ice. The driver was speechless, his hands frozen on the wheel. "Sir, But Julian was no longer listening. His gaze was fixed through the windshield, through the mesmerizing sweep of the wipers. A small, furious face was pressed against the glass, framed by wet blonde hair plastered to the skull. It was a child. A girl. She was climbing onto the hood of his car. Her tiny pink sneakers, one with a flashing red light, squealed on the wet metal. She scrambled up, all frantic limbs, until she was on all fours, glaring in at him like a cornered animal. She held something up, slamming it against the glass. A piece of paper, already blurring in the rain. It was a drawing, a crayon drawing of a dog. Julian stared, utterly dumbfounded. This was impossible. This was a breach. His multi-billion-dollar video conference call, still active on his tablet, was momentarily forgotten. The girl, her face streaked with rain and tears, began to hit the glass, her tiny fists making dull, wet thuds. "Have you seen him?" she shrieked, her voice a thin, desperate sound that somehow pierced the acoustic-dampened glass. "His name is Patch. He's lost." Julian Thorne, a man who could dismantle a corporation with a single word, was held hostage by a 7-year-old girl on the hood of his car. The mystery wasn't just the dog. It was the absolute, terrifying sincerity in her eyes. It was an emotion he hadn't cataloged in decades. "Get that thing off my car," Julian ordered, his voice dangerously low. The driver, pale, unbuckled his seatbelt. "Sir, she's just a child. I don't care if she's the ghost of Christmas past. Remove her. Now. I am in the middle of a $500 million acquisition." The driver fumbled with the door handle, but the light turned green. Behind them, a symphony of horns began to blare. The girl didn't flinch. She just kept slamming the paper against the window. "Please, he's brown and white. He's my best friend." The driver looked back, panicked. "Sir, the traffic." Julian's jaw tightened into a single, brutal line. He pressed a button on his console. An intercom. "Get off my vehicle." His voice boomed from a speaker, startling the girl. "Or you will be arrested." She recoiled, her face crumpling. The fury vanished, replaced by a terrible, raw despair. She slid ungracefully off the hood, landing on the wet pavement. She stood there, soaked to the bone, a tiny, defiant statue of misery, clutching her soggy drawing as the river of impatient commuters began to surge around them. The driver, seeing his chance, accelerated smoothly. The Rolls-Royce pulled away, its engine a demure whisper. Julian watched in the side mirror as the girl shrank, becoming just another piece of urban detritus. He picked up his tablet. The screen was filled with the stunned, disbelieving faces of his board members. "Gentlemen," Julian said, straightening his tie, his composure absolute. "My apologies. A minor disturbance. Now, Marcus, regarding the asset liquidation." He won the vote. The merger was a success. He made, on paper, another $90 million before his car even reached his building. He felt nothing. The day proceeded with its usual sterile precision. His penthouse was less a home than a gallery. A vast, glass-walled space, high above the city, furnished with pieces that were famous, expensive, and profoundly uncomfortable. His life was curated. His meals were curated. His relationships, few as they were transactions. He spoke to his assistant, Evelyn, a woman of terrifying efficiency, who managed his life via a shared digital calendar. He reviewed quarterly reports. He approved a hostile takeover strategy. And yet, through the silent hum of his purified air system, he kept hearing that thin, reedy shriek. "Have you seen him?" It was inefficient. The memory was clutter. He dismissed it. Later that night, the city was baptized in a brutal electric storm. Julian stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of 30-year-old whiskey in hand, watching the lightning fork over the distant, poorer boroughs. He found the chaos of the storm aesthetically pleasing. It was power, indifferent and absolute. His driver was waiting for him downstairs. He had a gala to attend, a charity event that was purely about reinforcing social and financial hierarchies. He despised them, but attendance was a necessary function of his station. As he stepped out of the private elevator into the marble lobby, his driver, the same one from that afternoon, was holding the door. "Sir, a moment," the driver said, his voice unusually strained. Julian paused, annoyed. "What is it?" The driver gestured awkwardly toward the service entrance, a dark alleyway where the building's refuse was collected. Well, sir, listen." Julian sighed, the sound of a man whose time was being stolen, microsecond by microsecond. He listened. Over the howl of the wind and the hiss of the rain he heard it, a high-pitched, desperate yipping. It was pathetic. "It's an animal," Julian stated. "Call animal control. That's what they're for." "I did, sir. They said with the storm, it could be hours. It's very small, sir." The driver, a man named Henderson, Julian finally glimpsed the name tag on his uniform, was looking at him with an expression Julian couldn't parse. It was almost expectant. Julian felt a sudden, illogical irritation. "And? What do you propose, Henderson? That I, personally, wade into that alley? Do you know what this suit costs?" "No, sir. Of course not. It sounds so lost." That word. Lost. It echoed the girl's shriek. Julian found his feet moving. He didn't know why. He was walking, his handmade leather shoes clicking on the wet pavement, toward the alley. The smell of wet garbage and ozone hit him, and there, huddled behind a row of overflowing dumpsters, shaking so violently it looked like a vibration, was a dog. It was a puppy. A miserable, mud-caked, shivering creature no bigger than one of Julian's loafers. It was brown and white. It looked up at him, its eyes wide with terror, and let out another heartbreaking whine. Julian stared. He felt nothing. Disgust, perhaps. It was filthy. It was irrelevant. Then the puppy, in a last desperate bid, crawled forward, dragging its muddy belly, and licked his shoe. It was a warm, wet, trusting gesture. Julian flinched, repulsed. He was about to turn and leave. He should have turned and left. But the image of the girl's face, pressed against his windshield, flashed in his mind. He's brown and white. It was a statistical improbability. It was a ridiculous coincidence. "Sir," Henderson called, holding an umbrella uselessly against the driving rain. Julian made a decision. It was not logical. It was not efficient. It was, perhaps, the first truly irrational thing he had done in his adult life. "Get the blanket from the trunk, Henderson," Julian ordered, his voice clipped. "We're taking it." The journey up to the penthouse in the private elevator was a study in contrasts. Julian Thorne, smelling of his $400 cologne, stood rigidly in one corner. In the opposite corner, Henderson held a writhing, whimpering bundle wrapped in a cashmere emergency blanket that had come standard with the Rolls-Royce. The dog, now that it was out of the rain, had begun to smell. It was a thick, pungent aroma of wet fur, alleyway garbage, and something uniquely, profoundly dog. "It will not enter my home," Julian said, as the elevator doors slid open to his pristine foyer. "It will go to the staff kitchen. You will find a box. You will put it in the box. And you will find a 24-hour veterinarian who makes house calls." "A vet, sir?" "Yes, have it. Scanned. Cleaned. Deloused. Whatever it is you do to stray animals. And Henderson, sir, bill the cleaning of the elevator and the blanket to my personal account. And not a word of this to anyone, especially not Evelyn. Good night." Julian swept into his apartment, shedding his jacket. He went straight to his bar, pouring another whiskey. He could hear, faintly, the sound of Henderson trying to corral the animal in the service area. He heard a yelp, a clatter, one of the chef's pans, he presumed, and then finally, silence. He put on a vinyl recording of a bleak, complex cello suite and tried to return to his work. But the silence from the kitchen was now expectant. He had introduced a variable into his controlled environment, and the equation was no longer balancing. An hour later, his patience snapped. He walked through the silent, museum-like corridors to the staff kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel he had never personally used. Henderson was gone. On the floor, in a large cardboard box that had once held artisanal water bottles, was the dog. It was no longer shivering. It was, however, still filthy. It had apparently been given a bowl of water, one of his baccarat crystal tumblers, he noted with a wince, and had promptly tracked muddy paw prints all over the white tile floor. The dog was standing on its hind legs, its front paws on the edge of the box, looking up at him. It wasn't whining. It was just watching. "So," Julian said to the animal, feeling absurd, "you are a problem." The dog tilted its head, its ears flopping. "You are a dirty, inefficient, resource-draining problem." The dog wagged its tail, a tiny, tentative thump-thump-thump against the cardboard. Julian sighed. He was a man who commanded armies of lawyers and analysts. He could not be defeated by this. He went to his linen closet, a room the size of a small apartment, and pulled out an Egyptian cotton towel, one with a thread count so high it felt like water. He returned to the kitchen, dropped the towel into the box, and stared as the dog, confused at first, finally burrowed into the plush fabric, turned in a circle 3 times, and collapsed into an exhausted, snoring heap. Julian Thorne watched the muddy, foul-smelling creature sleep on a $300 towel for a full 10 minutes. The feeling he was experiencing was not warmth or affection. It was profound confusion. He was wasting time. And yet he couldn't seem to make himself leave. The next morning, Julian woke at his customary 4 a.m. His routine was immutable. Half an hour in his private gym, a cold shower, a protein-based nutritional slurry delivered by his chef, and then at 5 a.m., the Asian markets. But his routine was broken. The first thing he saw when he entered his kitchen was the trail of dried mud. The box was empty. "Henderson?" he called out, before remembering he'd given the man the night off after the incident. A faint scratching sound came from the living area. He followed it. The puppy was standing in the middle of his vast white rug, looking utterly lost, but it was not the rug that held Julian's attention. It was what was in the puppy's mouth. It was one of Julian's shoes. Not just any shoe. A handcrafted, custom-lasted Italian leather loafer that had cost more than Henderson's monthly salary. And the dog was, with evident satisfaction, chewing it. No. Julian's voice was sharp, and the puppy, startled, dropped the shoe and cowered, a small, dark puddle forming on the priceless rug. Julian froze. He was looking at the destruction of his property and a biological contamination of his living space. His instinct was to call security, to have the animal removed, to incinerate the rug and the shoe. He took a deep, cleansing breath. It is just an animal. It is acting according to its nature. He walked slowly, deliberately, to his intercom. Evelyn. His assistant's voice was instantly available, crisp and awake, even at 4:30 a.m. Yes, Mr. Thorne, there is a situation in my penthouse, a biological contaminant. Sir, are you ill? Shall I dispatch your physician? No, it is. Quadrupedal. Henderson brought in a stray dog last night. There was a silence on the line, so profound Julian thought the connection had dropped. A dog, sir? Yes. A small brown and white one. It has destroyed a shoe and soiled a rug. I need you to handle it. Find a shelter, a service, whatever. I want it gone within the hour, and send the restoration team for the rug. Of course, Mr. Thorne. Evelyn's voice was a mask of professional calm, but Julian could sense her utter bewilderment. He hung up. He looked at the dog. The dog looked at him. It was shivering again, its ears flat against its head, its eyes wide with the certain knowledge that it was in terrible trouble. You, Julian said, pointing, are a catastrophe. He walked away, grabbed a different pair of shoes, and went to his home office, sealing the door behind him. He tried to work. He tried to focus on the intricate financial models displayed on his wall of monitors, but his focus was shattered. He kept seeing those terrified eyes. This is not my problem, he told himself. It is an animal, a pest. An hour later, Evelyn buzzed him. Mr. Thorne, the service you requested is on its way. They'll be at the service entrance in 10 minutes. Good, Julian said, relieved. Wait, Evelyn added, her voice hesitant. Mr. Thorne, this is, well, it's a bit strange, but I was cross-referencing local social media feeds for any lost dog reports matching the description, just to ensure there are no liability issues with transferring it to a shelter. And I found something. Evelyn, I don't have time for. Sir, please look at the file I just sent to your tablet. Julian sighed and opened the file. It wasn't a file. It was a video. A low-quality, shaky video taken on a cell phone during the rainstorm yesterday. It showed a small, blonde girl, soaked to the skin, standing on a street corner, holding up a soggy drawing and crying as people walked past her. The caption read, "Someone help this poor kid. Been out here for hours looking for her dog, Patch." And then, the camera zoomed in on the drawing. It was crude. It was childish. But it was unmistakably the dog currently cowering in his living room. Julian's blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her dog. The girl from the hood of his car, the one he had dismissed, threatened, and driven away from. Sir? Evelyn's voice was soft. That's the girl from yesterday, isn't it? The disturbance. Julian didn't answer. He was staring at the video. He watched as a woman, her mother, he assumed, ran up, her face a mask of worry, and wrapped the girl in a hug, trying to pull her home. The girl fought her, screaming, "No, we have to find him. We have to." The video ended. Julian was left staring at his own reflection in the dark screen. He saw his immaculate suit, his cold eyes, his perfectly groomed stubble. And for the first time, he felt something other than irritation or confusion. He felt a deep, unfamiliar, and profoundly uncomfortable lurch. It felt like shame. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, the animal control unit is here." Julian looked at his monitors. He looked at the door to his living room, where the dog was. He thought of the girl's face pressed against the glass. He thought of her tiny, desperate fists. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet, "cancel the unit, and cancel my 9 o'clock. Clear the morning." "Sir, you're meeting with the board of..." "Clear the morning." "Yes, sir." "What? What shall I tell them?" Julian stood up. He walked to the door of his office and opened it. The puppy was still there, huddled by the soiled spot on the rug, not having moved an inch. "Tell them," Julian said, looking at the animal. "Tell them I have a prior engagement. A delivery I need to make personally." The address on the flyer, which Evelyn had managed to track down from a community Facebook group, was on the other side of the city. Not just geographically, but existentially. Julian's driver, Henderson, navigated the Rolls-Royce out of the sterile glass and steel canyons of the financial district and into the older, crumbling boroughs. Here the buildings were brick, stained with soot and time. The streets were cracked, the shops had bars on the windows, and the people who walked them had a weariness that Julian had only ever observed from a distance. He was, to put it mildly, out of place. He had changed out of his suit. The shoe-chewing incident had convinced him. But his casual wear was a cashmere V-neck and trousers that cost in total more than the combined annual income of this entire city block. In his lap, sitting on the $300 towel, was the dog. After a frantic call, Julian had managed to get a mobile vet to his penthouse at 6 a.m. The dog, now named Patch with 99% certainty, had been given a clean bill of health, a hasty bath, and a calming shot for the car ride. He was no longer a muddy mess, but a rather fluffy, if bewildered, creature. Henderson pulled the car to a stop in front of a tenement building that looked like it had been condemned, then stubbornly refused to fall. "This is it, sir," Henderson said, his voice carefully neutral. "Do you want me to wait?" "No," Julian said, opening the door himself. "You will. Park around the corner of us and wait." He stepped out, holding the dog. The towel was still clutched in his other hand. He felt like he was holding a live grenade. The lobby smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. A group of teenagers on the stairs stopped their conversation to stare at him. Julian Thorne was not used to being stared at with such open, undisguised suspicion. He ignored them, found the rickety, rattling elevator and rode it to the 4th floor, apartment 4B. The door was painted appealing, cheerful yellow. A small crayon-drawn sign said, "Lily's room. No grown-ups allowed, except Mom." He knocked. For a moment there was no answer. He heard faint, muffled sobs from within. He knocked again, harder. The door chain rattled, and the door opened a crack. A woman with exhausted, red-rimmed eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun peered out. She was wearing a faded nursing scrub top and sweatpants. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. "Are you Sarah?" Julian asked, consulting the name Evelyn had given him. "Sarah Miller?" "Yes. Who are you?" Her eyes flicked from his face to his expensive sweater, to the dog in his arms, and then back to the dog. Her mouth fell open. I believe," Julian said, feeling impossibly awkward, "that I have your dog." The sobs from inside the apartment stopped instantly. "Mommy, who is it?" The door was thrown open. The girl from the car, Lily, stood there. She was wearing mismatched pajamas, her face puffy from crying. She looked at Julian, and her eyes went wide. Then she saw the dog. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Patch," she whispered. The dog, who had been quiet, suddenly exploded. He yelped, he squirmed, and he leaped from Julian's arms. Lily shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, and dropped to her knees. The dog was all over her, licking her face, his tail a brown and white blur. "Patch, Patch, you came back, you came back." Lily was sobbing, but these were not the tears of despair Julian had seen yesterday. This was a deluge of pure relief. She hugged the dog so tightly Julian was afraid she might break him. Sarah, the mother, was clutching the doorframe, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her own face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God. Where? How?" Julian just stood there in the doorway, a silent, awkward monolith. He had never witnessed an explosion of emotion this raw. It was deafening. "You found him," Sarah said, finally looking at Julian. She was wiping her face, trying to compose herself. "You're the man from the car. The car Lily climbed on." Julian nodded stiffly. "Yes, I apologize for my behavior yesterday. Your daughter was distressed." "She was." Sarah laughed, a wet, hiccuping sound. "She's stubborn. I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have done that. I've told her." "It's fine," Julian interrupted. "I found him, last night, in an alley, near my building." Sarah's face clouded. "Your building? That's downtown. That's 5 miles from here. How did he—" She knelt and hugged Lily, who was still refusing to let go of the dog. "He must have been so scared." "Mommy," Lily suddenly said, her voice muffled in Patch's fur. She looked up at Julian, her blue eyes clear now, locking onto his. "You brought him home." "Yes," Julian said. He seems to belong to you." "Thank you," Lily said, her voice small and serious. She stood up, pulling Patch with her. She looked at her mother, then back at Julian. Then she did something that completely derailed Julian's entire cognitive framework. She ran to her bedroom. Julian and Sarah stood in awkward silence. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Thorne," Julian supplied. "Julian Thorne. Mr. Thorne, we don't have much. Can I get you some coffee? A cup of tea?" Julian, who was used to Kopi Luwak brewed at a precise 92 degrees Celsius, looked around the tiny, cluttered, but spotlessly clean apartment. He saw a broken toaster held together with duct tape. He saw a stack of bills on the small kitchen counter. "That's not necessary," he said. "I should be." "Wait!" Lily ran back out. She was holding a piece of paper. Not the soggy flyer from yesterday. This was a new one, carefully cut from construction paper. It was a coupon. She had drawn a border of red hearts, and in the middle, in shaky 7-year-old printing, it said, "1 free hug. Good forever. From Lily." She walked up to him, her expression one of utmost gravity, and held it out. "This is for you," she said. "It's my best reward. It's worth everything." Julian stared at the small, pink piece of paper. His hands, which had signed checks for sums that could buy small countries, felt heavy and numb. He looked at the coupon, then at her beaming, expectant face. He was a man of transactions. This was a transaction, but the currency was one he didn't understand. "Go on," Sarah whispered, smiling through her tears. "It's her highest honor." Slowly, almost mechanically, Julian reached out and took the piece of paper. It was flimsy. The crayon was waxy under his fingertips. He looked at it. "Good forever." "Thank you," he said, his voice sounding rusty to his own ears. "It's very valuable." "I know," Lily said, puffing her chest out. "Now do you want to cash it in?" Julian froze. He looked at Sarah, panicked. Sarah just smiled. "She means, do you want a hug?" A hug. A hug. He didn't do hugs. He didn't touch people. His relationships were contractual. But Lily was already stepping forward, her arms wide open. Before he could protest, she had wrapped her arms around his waist, squeezing him with all her 7-year-old might. Her head barely reached his belt. He could smell the faint, sweet scent of strawberry shampoo and dog. Julian stood rigid, his arms locked at his sides. He was a fortress being assaulted by a dandelion. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. "Thank you for saving Patch, Mr. Thorne," she mumbled into his cashmere sweater. Then she stepped back, beamed at him, and ran back to the dog. Julian stood in the hallway, the paper coupon clutched in his hand. He felt strange, like his circuitry was shorting out. He nodded stiffly at Sarah. "Good day, Mrs. Miller." "Mr. Thorne," she called as he turned to leave. "Thank you. You have no idea what you've done." He walked to the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, he was left alone in the rattling metal box. He looked down at his hand. He was still holding the coupon. Good forever. He didn't put it in his pocket. He opened his wallet, a slim black alligator skin case, and slid the small pink piece of paper into the slot where he kept his $10,000 limit Amex. It looked, he thought, profoundly, ridiculously, and wonderfully out of place. Julian Thorne did not return to work. He had Henderson drive him home, and he spent the rest of the day in his penthouse, not working, not taking calls, not optimizing. He just sat. He sat in his vast, silent living room, staring at the city, while the memory of the hug, the physical sensation of those small arms, replayed in his mind. It was a data point he could not reconcile. It was an act of pure, unconditional gratitude. She had offered him the only thing she had of value. He had, in his life, been thanked countless times. Usually it was a prelude to someone asking for something. More money, a promotion, access. This was different. This was a closed loop. A gift given with no expectation of return. The pink coupon in his wallet felt heavier than a bar of gold. He found himself thinking about the apartment, the peeling paint, the broken toaster, the stack of bills. He thought of Sarah's face, the deep, exhausted lines around her eyes, even when she smiled. A nurse, she'd been wearing a scrub top. A hard, thankless job. He had an impulse. It was the same one that had made him stop for the dog. He picked up his phone. "Evelyn, Mr. Thorne, are you all right?" "I'm fine. I have a task for you. Sarah and Lily Miller. The address you found. I want a file." "A file, sir?" "A financial file, a background file. I want to know their situation. Is the mother employed? What is their financial status? Do it quietly. Use my private discretionary fund. I want no official record." "Sir, that's highly irregular. It borders on my business, Evelyn. Just do it." He hung up. He knew what he was going to do. He would solve their problem. It's what he did. He solved problems. He would send them a check. An anonymous cashier's check. 10,000, 20, enough to fix the toaster, pay the bills. It would be a simple, clean transaction. A final, tidy end to this strange, inefficient episode. He would buy his way back to his old, ordered life. He would balance the equation. Evelyn was, as always, brutally efficient. The file was on his secure server within 3 hours. It was not a long file, but it was a dense one. Julian opened it, and the world he had so carefully reconstructed began to fracture. Sarah Miller was a pediatric nurse, a good one, with glowing commendations. She was also a widow. Her husband, Michael, had been a firefighter. He had died 2 years prior, not in a fire, but from a long, agonizing battle with a rare form of lung cancer, a direct result of his exposure to toxins during a chemical plant fire. The medical bills had been catastrophic. The insurance had run out. Sarah had been left with a mountain of debt that she was slowly, hopelessly trying to pay off on a nurse's salary. She worked double shifts, sometimes triple shifts, at St. Jude's Community Hospital. She was, the file concluded, approximately 3 weeks from total insolvency. Julian read this with a clinical detachment. It was a sad story, but not an unfamiliar one. The world was full of sad stories. He was about to close the file and authorize the anonymous check when he saw the last attachment. It was a list of her primary creditors. The largest, the one holding the bulk of her late husband's medical debt, was the hospital itself. St. Jude's Community Hospital. A cold electric shock went down Julian's spine. He knew that name. He knew it very, very well. He opened a different file on his computer, the one from yesterday's merger, the Argentis acquisition. Argentis was a massive healthcare conglomerate, and one of its minor, underperforming assets, one of the redundancies he had personally approved for asset liquidation and closure, was a small, failing inner-city hospital, St. Jude's. He wasn't just a random billionaire who had found a dog. He was the man who was about to sign the order that would close Sarah Miller's hospital, destroy her livelihood, and in all likelihood, make her and her daughter homeless. The girl who had given him the worth everything reward. He was about to take everything from her. The room, which was always kept at a precise 68 degrees, suddenly felt airless. Julian stood up and walked to the window. The city lights glittered below, a diamond-strewn carpet of humanity he had always viewed as an abstract. Now he saw one of those lights. A single, flickering bulb in a fourth-floor apartment, where a little girl was sleeping with her lost-and-found dog. He had believed he could fix her problem with a check, but he was her problem. He was the wolf at her door, and he hadn't even known it. This was no longer a simple transaction. It was a moral abyss. He spent the night sleepless. His mind, usually a clean, cold engine of logic, was a storm of conflict. The deal was done. The papers were signed. The closure of St. Jude's was a footnote, a tiny cog in a machine worth billions. To reverse it, to even suggest reversing it, would be seen as madness. It would be corporate suicide. Marcus, the executive who had pushed for the acquisition, would smell blood. He would be questioned. His judgment would be questioned. The market would react. Billions in shareholder value could be wiped out. All for what? A nurse? A little girl? A dog? It was illogical. It was sentimental. It was by every metric he had ever lived by the single stupidest idea of his life. And yet, he kept seeing the coupon. He kept feeling the hug. He kept hearing that shriek of joy. You came back. At 4 a.m., his usual rising time, he made a call. Evelyn, get me everything we have on St. Jude's. Not the Argentis summary. I want the real files. I want patient ledgers, community impact reports, staff retention rates. I want to know everything. And find out who the current administrator is. Set up a meeting. Today. Off the books. And Evelyn. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Cancel. Cancel my entire day. Again. The silence on the other end was, for the first time, not respectful. It was worried. Sir, may I ask, is this about the Miller family? This, Julian said, his voice hard, is about an underperforming asset. I'm doing my due diligence. He lied. It was the first time he had ever felt the need to lie to his own assistant. The truth was, he had no idea what it was about. His meeting was with a Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who, ironically, shared his surname but not a cent of his fortune. Dr. Thorne was the hospital administrator, a man in his late 60s with the face of a tired bloodhound and a cheap, frayed suit. He met Julian not at a restaurant, but in a small, windowless office in the hospital's basement. The room smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee. I was told this was about a private philanthropic donation, Dr. Thorne said, his voice gravelly. But your name, Mr. Thorne. Julian Thorne, Thorne Industries. You're the one who just bought Argentis. You're the one who's closing us down. Julian sat opposite him on a squeaking metal chair. The board's decision is not yet final. I am here to review the asset. Dr. Thorne let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Review the asset? We're not an asset, son. We're a lifeline. Do you know what happens to this community if we close? The next nearest emergency room is 40 minutes away. 40. For a gunshot wound, a stroke, an asthma attack. That's a death sentence. We're the only pediatric clinic for 6 square miles that takes Medicaid without a fight. We're the place the homeless come when they have pneumonia. We're not profitable. We're necessary. He threw a thick, faded binder onto the desk. This is our value. That's a list of the community programs we run, all on a shoestring. That's our patient load. 80%, un- or underinsured. You close us. You're not liquidating an asset. You're murdering a community. You're putting thousands of people on the street. People like Sarah Miller. Julian's face remained impassive, but his heart hammered against his ribs. You know Mrs. Miller? Know her? Sarah's one of my best nurses. She's the heart of our pediatric wing. Works herself to the bone, picks up every holiday, every double. All to pay off the debt this system saddled her with after her husband died, the debt we're forced to hold. You think I want to be a debt collector? Argentis gives us targets. We miss them. They cut our funding. Now you are here to finish the job. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes blazing with a righteous, exhausted fury. So go ahead, Mr. Thorne, review us. But don't you dare call it philanthropy. Call it what it is. An execution. Julian walked through the hospital. He had insisted. Dr. Thorne, with a grim, be my guest wave, had let him. He walked through the ER, a chaotic, overcrowded space where doctors and nurses moved with a frantic, practiced grace. He saw a man with a stab wound being wheeled in, next to an elderly woman gasping for air. He walked through the pediatric wing. It was not what he expected. It was old, the paint was peeling, but the walls were covered, every square inch, with children's drawings. Bright, colorful, defiant drawings of superheroes and flowers and dogs. He saw a nurse, her back to him, sitting on the edge of a bed, holding the hand of a small, sleeping boy with no hair. She was humming a soft, low tune. The nurse turned, hearing his footsteps. It was Sarah Miller. She was on a shift. She didn't see him. She was focused entirely on the child. Julian backed away, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He saw it all. The systemic failure, the desperate, heroic effort of the staff, the children, the debt, the absolute, unquantifiable value of the place. He had a choice. He could walk away, let the machine do its work, and send Sarah an anonymous check. She would be fine. She would get another job, eventually. The community, well, the market would adapt. That was the logic. Or he could light a match and throw it into the engine room of his own life. The emergency board meeting was convened the next morning. It was not a request. It was a summons. Julian Thorne, CEO and majority shareholder, had called it at 6 a.m. The room was dark, paneled in expensive, oppressive mahogany. The faces of his board were tense. They were expecting a new acquisition, a new triumph. "Good morning," Julian said, his voice flat. He stood at the head of the table. "I am officially tabling a motion to halt the closure of the St. Jude's Community Hospital asset." The silence was absolute. Marcus, his sleek, predatory COO, was the first to speak. "Julian, is this a joke?" "I am also tabling a second motion," Julian continued, his voice cutting through the disbelief. Thorne Industries will immediately absorb all outstanding medical debts held by the St. Jude's facility, effective immediately. And we will be investing $50 million from our private fund to establish a new pediatric oncology wing and guarantee the hospital's full operational budget for the next 10 years. It was pandemonium. He's lost his mind. 50 million into a sinkhole? This is a breach of fiduciary duty. The shareholders will crucify us. You! Marcus stood up, his face purple. Julian, what the hell is this? You were the one who demanded the redundancies. You said it was optimal. We just closed the deal. You can't just reverse a core strategic decision overnight. It makes us look weak. It's financial malpractice. Why? All eyes were on him. The entire weight of his life, his reputation, his empire was in that room. He was a king, and he was deliberately abdicating. He could give them 1,000 logical reasons. He could talk about community investment, brand rehabilitation, long-term social capital. He had, in fact, prepared an entire brilliant presentation on that very subject. But as he looked at their cold, angry, calculating faces, he realized he didn't want to. He reached into his pocket, not for his phone, not for a file. He reached into his alligator skin wallet. He pulled out the small, pink, crayon-adorned coupon. He let it flutter onto the polished mahogany table. It landed in the center, a tiny, absurd splash of color in the monochrome world. One free hug. Good forever. Marcus stared at it. What is that? That, Julian said, his voice quiet, is my why. That is the asset I am protecting. My vote is IE. And as I hold 51% of the voting stock, this meeting is adjourned. He walked out. He left them screaming. He left them calling his lawyers, his investors. He didn't care. He walked out of his building, past the stunned security guards, and for the first time in his life, he didn't take his car. He walked. He walked the 5 miles from his office to apartment 4B. It took him 2 hours. He was sweating, his shoes were scuffed, and the city air felt thick in his lungs. But he felt light. When he arrived, his hand was shaking as he knocked. It was Sarah who opened the door. She was in her robe, her hair down. She looked shocked. Mr. Thorne? Julian? What are you doing here? Is something wrong? No, he said, breathing hard. Nothing is wrong. I was in the neighborhood. You walked? Yes. She stared at him, this strange, powerful man, who looked completely undone, standing on her welcome mat. Mommy? Who is it? Lily's voice. She ran to the door, Patch yipping at her heels. It's Mr. Thorne, she beamed. Hi, Mr. Thorne. Did you come to see Patch? I did, Julian said. And, I came to see you, Lily. He looked at Sarah, whose face was a mask of confusion. Mrs. Miller. Sarah, I need to tell you something. He didn't know how to say it. I own the company that was about to ruin you, and I've just set my own life on fire to stop it. It sounded insane. He didn't say any of that. He just looked at Lily. He reached into his pocket, his hand brushing against the wallet. But he didn't need the coupon. Lily, he said, his voice thick. I was wondering. That reward you gave me yesterday. The hug. The coupon? She said, her eyes wide. Yes. I was wondering. Is that offer? Is it still good? Lily's face broke into a smile so bright it hurt to look at. It's good forever, silly. I wrote it right there. She launched herself at him. This time, Julian didn't freeze. This time, he was ready. He knelt, his knees cracking on the hard hallway floor, and he caught her. He wrapped his arms around this tiny, 7-year-old girl, burying his face in her strawberry-scented hair as Patch jumped up, licking his ear. And Julian Thorne, a man who had not shed a tear since his own mother's funeral 30 years prior, held on to this child and wept. He wept for his empty, sterile life. He wept for the man he had been, and he wept for the first time with a feeling he could finally defy. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't shame. It was joy. Sarah stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, tears rolling down her own cheeks. She didn't understand what was happening, not really. But she saw this powerful, broken man kneeling on her floor, being healed by her daughter, and she knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The fallout was, as predicted, catastrophic. And wonderful. Marcus staged a boardroom coup. It failed. Julian's sentimental move, as the financial papers called it, was initially seen as a sign of weakness. But then the other press got the story. Billionaire saves community hospital. The Thorne Heart Initiative. Why Julian Thorne traded billions for a hug. It was a PR miracle, one he hadn't intended. His employees, who had always feared him, began to respect him. Young, idealistic engineers and analysts wanted to work for him. His company, which had always been seen as a ruthless predator, was suddenly the face of compassionate capitalism. His stock, after an initial terrifying plunge, stabilized, and then began to climb. But Julian wasn't watching the stock market. He was in the St. Jude's pediatric wing. He was wearing jeans. He was awkward. He was out of place. But he was there. He had, in the following weeks, quietly, personally, paid off the entirety of Sarah Miller's debt. He hadn't told her. His lawyers had. She had tried to thank him, but she was speechless, choking on a gratitude so profound it left no room for words. He'd just nodded and asked her if she knew how to fix a broken toaster. He had funded the hospital. He had saved her job. But he had also, inadvertently, saved himself. He became a regular, clumsy visitor to that small fourth-floor apartment. He brought groceries. He brought a new toaster. He brought a dog bed that cost more than their couch, which Patch ignored in favor of sleeping on Lily's bed. He didn't come as a benefactor. He came as Julian. He would sit at their small, wobbly kitchen table, drinking instant coffee. And he would listen. He listened to Sarah talk about her patients. He listened to Lily talk about her school play. She was a tree. He learned their lives. He, in turn, awkwardly, told them about his. Not about the billions, about the emptiness, about the silence, about the dog he had never had as a child. A new, strange, and tentative family was being built. It wasn't a romance. It was something far deeper. It was a friendship. It was a connection. One evening, months later, Julian was at the park across from their building. He had left a black-tie gala early. "I have a prior engagement," he'd told a stunned governor. He was throwing a stick for Patch, who had grown into a sleek, happy, and boundlessly energetic dog. Julian, in his tuxedo, was throwing the stick with a grim, focused determination, as if trying to optimize its aerodynamic trajectory. Lily was laughing at him. "No, Mr. Thorne, you have to flick it, like this." Sarah sat on the bench watching them, a soft, peaceful smile on her face. Her life was no longer a daily terror of bills and exhaustion. She was happy. "You're getting grass stains on your pants," she called out. "They'll clean," Julian called back, wiping a smudge of dirt from his sleeve. Patch dropped the slobber-covered stick at his feet. Julian sighed, picked it up and threw it again. He was, he realized, perfectly, completely, and inefficiently happy. He had given up, in the eyes of his old world, so much. He had compromised. He had sacrificed. But as he stood in the twilight, a billionaire in a dirty tuxedo, playing fetch with a stray dog and a 7-year-old girl, he knew he had just closed the single greatest deal of his life. He hadn't just saved a hospital, he had cashed in his reward. And it truly was good forever.